Looking back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. Our life was this perfect picture I'd helped paint, and I guess I wasn't ready to admit the canvas was covered in lies. The party was supposed to be our big night, our annual summer event that everyone in our little suburban world talked about for weeks. I'd spent days getting everything just right, from the caterers to the ridiculously expensive fairy lights Mark insisted we hang in the old oak tree in the backyard. From the kitchen window, I watched him working the crowd, and I had to admit he was brilliant at it. Mark could make anyone feel like they were the most important person in the world, a skill that had taken him right to the top of his company, and he was the perfect host, flipping burgers on the grill that cost more than my first car while making everyone laugh. He was the sun everyone orbited around, and for 10 years I'd been his most devoted planet. Oh, our life was exactly what it looked like from the outside, just a collection of expensive things and perfect moments for Instagram, from the sprawling house to the European vacations. We were the couple everyone said they wanted to be, which is funny because we were basically a walking, talking lie. I was playing the part of the perfect hostess, smiling and making sure everyone's glass was full while navigating the usual passive aggressive comments from the other corporate wives like Cynthia, my husband's boss's wife, who always managed to compliment and insult me in the same breath. My own life, my career as a designer had become this little hobby I was allowed to have, something to keep me busy between organizing our social life and making sure Mark's world ran smoothly. It was later in the evening when I first saw her, and I felt this strange little knot of unease in my stomach almost immediately. She was standing by the bar and just radiated this confidence that felt so out of place among the polite pastels and quiet conversations, wearing this crimson dress that clung to her and made her impossible to ignore. I didn't recognize her, so I went over to introduce myself, putting on my best hostess smile. Her name was Jessica, and she told me she worked with Mark, and the way she said it, the way she looked me up and down, it felt like a challenge. She had this look in her eyes, this mix of pity and arrogance, and when she mentioned she and Mark had been working very closely, I knew she was sending me a message. It was a tiny little dart of poison, and it hit its mark. I spent the rest of the night feeling like a ghost, just floating through my own party with a smile plastered on my face, but the conversation with her kept replaying in my mind. Mark was in an amazing mood, celebrating some deal he'd just sealed with a client at the party, and he came up behind me, kissing my neck and talking about the big promotion to senior vice president that was practically in the bag. He called me the perfect wife, and the words that used to make me feel proud just felt cold and hollow. I told him to go on up to bed, that I'd finished cleaning up the last of the party mess, needing a few moments alone to just breathe and push down the paranoia I felt creeping in. It was when I was clearing the living room that I saw it, a flash of red on the floor, half tucked under the sofa. I bent down and realized it was a tube of lipstick, a deep blood red shade that wasn't mine and definitely wasn't something any of my friends would wear. My heart started pounding because I just knew with this horrible, sinking feeling who it belonged to. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it could have been anyone's, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I looked out the glass doors to the backyard and my eyes went right to the guest house we had at the end of the lawn. The lights were on. A cold sweat washed over me because I had literally just watched Mark go upstairs, so he couldn't be down there working. My feet just started moving on their own, carrying me across the dark, damp grass toward that little cottage. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, and the door just swung open without a sound. And that's when my entire world fell apart. They were on the sofa, tangled up together, my husband and Jessica, the woman in the red dress. His shirt was open, her dress was hiked up, and they were kissing like they were starving for each other. For a second, they didn't see me. They were just in their own filthy little world. And I was frozen in the doorway, the lipstick still crushed in my hand. Then Mark's eyes opened and met mine, and the look of pure panic on his face was almost comical. He scrambled up trying to fix his clothes, while Jessica just looked annoyed, like I was the one who was interrupting something. She slowly pulled her dress down and just stared at me. No shame, no apology, nothing. I didn't scream or cry, I just stood there feeling nothing and everything all at once. Then I heard myself say in this eerily calm voice, "Don't let me interrupt." And I turned around and walked out. I walked back into the house, up the stairs to our bedroom. and it was only when the door was closed behind me that I finally broke, sinking to the floor and sobbing until there were no tears left. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the humiliation of it all, that he would do this in our home on this night with her. He had crossed a line. And as the sun came up, the grief started to curdle into a cold, hard rage. I wasn't just going to divorce him. That was too easy. I was going to make him understand what he had done, and I was going to cross a line of my own. The days that followed were a strange performance where I pretended to be the forgiving wife, while secretly plotting my revenge. I went about our daily routine, making Mark his coffee and listening to his pathetic, stumbling apologies about how it was all a drunken mistake that meant nothing. My calmness seemed to scare him more than any screaming match would have, because he expected tears and drama, not this cold, quiet emptiness. He tried to buy my forgiveness with a diamond necklace and a trip to Paris, and I accepted the gifts with a polite smile, each one feeling like another piece of evidence for the case I was building against him. In my mind, he swore he'd ended it with Jessica, but I knew he was lying from the way he suddenly guarded his phone and disappeared for hours, claiming he was at the gym. I let him believe his lies were working. I let him think I was weak and foolish because underestimating me was the biggest mistake he could possibly make. While he was busy trying to glue our broken life back together, I was taking a sledgehammer to the foundations of his. The first thing I did was hire the best private investigator I could find, a quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Jones who had a reputation for finding secrets no one else could. I met him in some dingy coffee shop and laid it all out, telling him I needed everything he could find on my husband, Mark Fox, and his colleague, Jessica Miller, not just the affair, but their finances, their work conduct, anything and everything. He didn't flinch, just named a price that made my eyes water and told me he'd be in touch. While Mr. Jones was doing his work, I started my own investigation right in our home office. After 10 years of supporting Mark's career, I knew his business almost as well as he did, and I knew his biggest weakness wasn't women, it was laziness. He cut corners and took credit for other people's work, and I had a strong suspicion he was misusing his expense account. I spent hours sifting through the chaotic mess of his old files and receipts, and it didn't take long to find a pattern of fraud. There were receipts for expensive client dinners on nights I knew he was home with me and invoices for consulting services from shell companies that didn't really exist. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a common thief. Then I found the real smoking gun, a series of emails buried deep in his archives between him and a young analyst in his department named David Chen. The emails proved that the huge award-winning project that was about to get Mark his promotion to senior vice president wasn't his at all, it was David's. Mark had stolen the entire thing from a trusting junior employee who saw him as a mentor and passed it off as his own. The rage I felt was so cold and pure it burned. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about justice for this young man too. Mr. Jones delivered his report a week later, a thick-bound document full of photos, transcripts, and financial records that laid out the secret life my husband had been living. It confirmed the affair with Jessica had been going on for over a year, with secret trips and promises of a future together. But the report also contained a bombshell that changed everything. Jessica Miller wasn't just some coworker, she was the niece of the company's CEO. She had been planted in the department to spy on everyone, including Mark, and feed information back to her powerful uncle. Suddenly it all made sense. Mark's promotion, Jessica's arrogance, all of it was part of a sick game. And the discovery of this fact solidified my plan because I realized I wasn't just going to take down Mark for cheating on me. I was going to use this information to expose the entire corrupt system he and Jessica were a part of. The grieving wife was gone, replaced by a woman who had a detailed plan and absolutely nothing left to lose. My plan for revenge was a campaign of quiet, calculated destruction, and I enjoyed every single minute of it. The first step was to get in touch with David Chen, the young analyst, whose work Mark had stolen. I found him on LinkedIn and sent him an anonymous email, telling him I knew what Mark had done and that I could help him get the justice he deserved. He was scared at first, knowing that going against a guy like Mark was career suicide, but I was persistent, leaking him little pieces of the evidence I had until he finally agreed to meet me in a noisy pub. I laid out the whole plan, assuring him his name would be kept out of it, and all he had to do was be ready to take back what was his when the dust settled. I could see the ambition warring with the fear in his eyes, but by the end of the night, he was on my side, my First, ally. Next, I went after Jessica. The PI report had given me the weapon I needed, a secret gambling, addiction, and mountains of debt she had hidden from her family. I created another, anonymous, email and sent it straight to her uncle, the CEO. The email was short, simply stating that I knew about his niece's problem and included a link to a folder with all the proof credit card, statements, betting account histories, everything. I also added a veiled threat about how damaging a scandal would be, especially with the company in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar merger I'd overheard Mark discussing. I was betting on the CEO being a ruthless businessman who would cut his losses to protect himself in the deal, and I was right. 2 days later, Jessica was quietly transferred to a dead-end job in some remote office, effectively removed from the board. One down, one to go. Now it was time for the checkmate. I spent the next week compiling every piece of evidence I had against Mark, the expense fraud, the stolen project, the affair, into one single, devastating report. It was my masterpiece, a meticulously detailed account of his corruption, complete with annotations and cross-references. I framed the affair not as a personal issue, but as part of a larger pattern of reckless and unethical behavior that made him a liability to the company. I was ready, I just had to wait for the perfect moment to strike, and I knew exactly when that would be. I chose the day of the company's quarterly town hall meeting, an event where everyone, from the interns to the board of directors, would be present. Mark was scheduled to be the keynote speaker, presenting the very project he'd stolen from David. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his career, the final victory lap before his promotion. I waited until I could see him on the meeting's live stream, walking up to the podium with that smug, self-satisfied smirk on his face, and right at that moment, I hit send. The email with the subject line, "The truth about Mark Fox," went out to every single employee in the company. I watched on my laptop as a ripple of confusion went through the crowd and people started looking down at their phones. The murmuring grew louder and Mark began to falter, his confident facade crumbling as he realized he'd lost the room. Then the CEO stood up, walked over to Mark, whispered something in his ear, and calmly escorted him off the stage before the live stream was abruptly cut. The silence in my living room was deafening, but I knew, without a single doubt, that I had won. The fallout from my email bomb was more immediate and destructive than I could have ever hoped for. The company immediately launched a massive internal investigation, and Mark was suspended with his office sealed and all his devices confiscated. The story, of course, was too juicy not to leak, and soon the business journals were having a field day with headlines screaming about the shocking scandal and the downfall of the corporate golden boy. Mark's entire world, the one he had built on lies and stolen credit, was completely and utterly destroyed. He was fired and publicly disgraced, his name blacklisted in the industry, and his reputation was left in tatters. It was a total and complete demolition. He showed up at the house a few days later, but he was like a ghost of the man I had married. The charisma and confidence were gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look in his eyes. He didn't yell or get angry. He just stared at me with this look of dawning horror as all the pieces clicked into place for him. "It was you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was you all along." I didn't bother to deny it. I just stood there and let him see the truth in my eyes. When he asked me why, a cold, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I told him he had the audacity to even ask that question after he'd cheated and humiliated me, after he'd broken my heart and disrespected our life together. I told him he thought he was untouchable, but he was wrong, and when he collapsed into a chair, whispering that he was ruined and had nothing left, I simply told him, my voice like ice, "You have exactly what you deserve." I filed for divorce the very next day, and the process was brutally efficient. With the mountain of evidence I had of both his infidelity and his financial fraud, I secured a settlement that left me with everything. The house, the savings, our assets. I walked away with my freedom, and I left him with nothing but his debts and his public shame. The other people in this drama also got what they deserved. David Chen was finally recognized for his brilliance and promoted, and he sent me a simple, heartfelt thank you note that actually made me tear up a little. Jessica, after being exiled to the company's version of Siberia, quietly resigned, and, from what I heard, her gambling addiction only got worse. I couldn't even feel pity for her, just a sense of grim finality. As for me, I was finally completely free. For the first few months after it was all over, the quiet in the house felt strange and overwhelming, and I found myself wondering if I had gone too far. My entire focus for so long had been on getting revenge that I hadn't really thought about what would come next, about who I was supposed to be now that I was no longer Mrs. Mark Fox. I had spent a decade of my life playing a part, and I realized I didn't really know who Alice was anymore. So I started to find out. I began by reclaiming my home, getting rid of all the cold, minimalist furniture Mark loved, and filling the space with color and art and things that made me happy. The house started to feel like mine for the first time. I reached out to the old friends I had drifted away from during my marriage, and they welcomed me back as if no time had passed, their laughter and support feeling like a balm on my still healing soul. And most importantly, I started to work again, diving back into my graphic design career. What started as just a way to fill the time soon became my passion all over again, and I discovered that I was not only good at it, but I was great. I started getting clients, winning awards, and building a name for myself completely on my own terms. I was no longer a wife with a hobby. I was a successful artist and a businesswoman. About a year later, I ran into Cynthia, my former boss's wife, at a gallery opening, and she looked at me with this shocked expression, gushing about how amazing I looked. She whispered about how sorry she was to hear about the scandal with Mark, and I just smiled a real, genuine smile. When she commented that I looked happy, I realized with a deep sense of certainty that I truly was. Walking away from her that night, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I had been through hell and had done things I never thought I was capable of. I had been ruthless and vengeful, and I had destroyed a man's life, and I didn't regret a single moment of it. I had to cross that line to find myself again, to burn down the old life so I could build a new one from the ashes. I had taken justice into my own hands, and in doing so, I had taken back my life. This wasn't just a story about revenge, it was the story of my rebirth.